This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This is our Eastern and Western Conference semifinal predicts, where we break down the remaining 8 teams on each of the respective conferences. And, you know, it's what it is, man. We're now on to the next round, finally. And some absolutely fabulous basketball played. A couple of shockers, you know what I'm saying? A couple of teams like my man Shaw calling them out, saying that they're brand new to the fix, shaking up the foundation of our predictions. This is what we talk about. This is what we live for. If you're an NBA fan, you've got to be excited about the next round of matchups to take place. We break them down. We give our predicts. Big shout outs to the NBA for screwing it up by having us already starting this semifinal rounds without everybody getting their opportunities to weigh in fresh off of the first round. But I'll leave that to be for my man Shaw to call them out properly. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet for my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado. My man from all the way back, throwback like cross colors and crisscross. You know what I'm saying? My man Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, www.shortsports.net. What's good, my brother?
I'm chilling, man. And salute to all the fans of NBA Baseline and all our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's great to be back. It's great to be back with you, my dude. As always, as you said, we go back a way, back to the days of DOS Effects and, Kumo D and all kinds of stuff when it comes to the early legends of hip hop, man. So but we have a lot of great basketball to discuss as always, man, because this has been an amazing and an absurdly crazy first round. As you alluded to, man, not really sure what the NBA did, kind of screwing over the Celtics a little bit, and the Washington Wizards making them start their series before everything else was finished in the first round overall. But nevertheless, hey, we have some great playoff basketball to discuss.
Yeah, definitely. I just, and we were just talking about this before we recorded the show. I really do not understand the logic with the NBA. And I think maybe to your point, Shaw, you alluded to it, is that, the justification is that they want at least 2 games being played between the first round going all the way out, at least until the conference finals. But this just makes absolutely no sense. You know that the Clippers and the Jazz are in a Game 7 situation. What good does it serve for you to already be starting the Eastern Conference semifinal round when you know that there is still a game left to be played in the Western Conference? To me, that just absolutely makes no sense.
Yeah, well, and I think they've done that before. I think even my original issue with it was that why was it the Boston Celtics and the Washington Wizards, who just finished Game 6s on the Friday before that? Toronto had wrapped up the day before, so they already knew they were going to play Cleveland. Like, you could have made that series kind of your Sunday thing, but I guess because they didn't know if there would be a Game 7, within those respective series, that's how they ended up getting screwed out of it. But either way, like I said, I don't think it was the best of moves. But hey, we got 2 games on Sunday, and we'll jump right into one of them in a little bit here.
Yeah, well, listen, the game that was played that is going to allow us, hopefully, by the time that we finish dropping this podcast, to be able to give, substantial and effective prediction is in reference to the number 1 seeded Boston Celtics, who came off a very tough, grueling series by all accounts, not just mentally, but physically and emotionally, coming fresh off of defeating the Chicago Bulls. And they take on, which largely by a lot of people's estimation and the way that they are playing basketball in the second half of the season, leading right up into the first round, just kind of sweeping the Atlanta Hawks to the side. The Washington Wizards, people were favoring the Wizards to be the possible team to knock off the Cleveland Cavaliers, or the best team viable to knock off the Cleveland Cavaliers. And to me, this is an interesting matchup, Shaw, because if you had asked me who would have rather seen in the first round for the Boston Celtics to play, I would not have been talking about the Chicago Bulls as equally as I would have been talking about how the Boston Celtics could have matched up a lot better maybe to the Washington Wizards. But this right now is exactly what we're getting for a semifinal matchup, and it's going to live up to the billing, no doubt.
Yeah, there's no question about it. These are 2 teams that have a lot of bad blood. And, we all talked about the Wizards, wearing black in January and saying that the Celtics will come to a funeral because they think the Celtics are dirty and the whole 9. And although Washington, again, we've said it before, they slipped a little bit towards the end of the stretch there. But they're one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference without a doubt. And they have a lot of angst for the Boston Celtics. And Boston looks like they have recovered from Isaiah Thomas losing his sister and from the early just kind of rumblings that the Bulls kind of gave them with their physicality. But again, this is going to be a pretty long series either way, and it really should be up to the benches. And we already saw here, I mean, and we're going to be very honest, we're recording after game one of this series now. It really
Thank you,
seems
NBA, once again. I might be doing this quite often throughout the course of this show. So
no doubt, no doubt. But it looks like if the Celtics bench is going to kind of just abuse the Washington bench the way that it did, then it really could be a series that Boston can win. And I wouldn't necessarily say easily, but they should definitely come out ahead overall and take the series if their bench is going to play the way it did in game one. Obviously, the big key to this, too, was Markieff Morris. He he sprained his ankle terribly in the first quarter of that game when Boston was making a run to come back as well too. And if he's going to be out the rest of this series, or maybe like even the first 2 or 3 games, that really is a setback for the Wizards because they don't have a lot of depth when it comes to their front court.
Yeah, well, when I look at this matchup, this is a matchup that I would think favors the Boston Celtics because from an offensive perspective, the front court, again, to me, tends to be a liability for the Washington Wizards, where if you are the Boston Celtics and the Boston Celtics liability is their front court, it seems to open up more doors for the Boston Celtics. I mean, I would look at the Washington Wizards and say, guys like Markieff Morris, who I really feel like has been very disappointing since game one of the first round of the playoffs against the Atlanta Hawks. And here was no surprise. He certainly was on his way maybe to having a productive afternoon before going down to that ankle injury. But guys like Otto Porter Jr., guys like Marcin Gortat, I feel like unless they step up, no matter how great John Wall and Bradley Beal will play, the equalizer is how these guys will equip themselves defensively against the likes of an Isaiah Thomas and an Avery Bradley. And I lean more towards the combination of Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley simply because those are the type of guys that like to get into the teeth of defenses. And when you're under Brad Stevens as a head coach, he's going to instill that upon those guys. They can wreak more havoc on the front court of the Washington Wizards than I would say the Washington Wizards backcourt wreaking havoc on the Boston Celtics defensive front court, because when those guys have length and tall, they also are better defensive discipline type players. Through the course of a 7-game series, to me, this may bode better for the Boston Celtics. Now, if Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley are ineffective, then I go to your point, Shaw. This comes down to their bench. And it was one of the things that I began to question about Danny Ainge and what he didn't do at the trade deadline. I may harp on it. People may get nauseated by me continuously harping on it. But this could be the type of series where part of that rears its ugly head unless you see the kind of productivity that we've seen tonight, where the Boston Celtics bench was far more effective than the Washington Wizards bench, at least in this first game of the semifinal round.
Well, the interesting point I think about the bench really is not that they got a bunch of scoring. I mean, Olynyk had 12 points in game one, and he did most of that damage in the first quarter. He kept posting up Bogdanovich and Kelly Oubre and guys like that, on bad switches where that Washington really didn't know how to defend. Wizards made a switch, I think, midway through the second quarter where Jason Smith came in the game, and that kind of stopped Olynyk going down on the block and getting his points. But for me, it was like you alluded to, the defense that guys like Terry Rozier came and played. Even Jaylen Brown, he only played 6 minutes, but he played those 6 minutes in the fourth quarter, had 5 points and 2 rebounds, and was kind of stemmed the tide a little bit of that Washington run and played great defense overall. Marcus Smart, I think, is going to be inserted into the starting lineup. Gerald Green will probably go to the bench for the remainder of this series. And the biggest key, I think, for Boston was really Terry Rozier grabbing 8 rebounds off the bench as well, too. What I am concerned about, though, a little bit, if you're the Celtics, is you do have to wonder if you can continue this three-point shooting. They hit 19 threes in game one, 19 of 39, so shot nearly 50% from the three-point line. And that a lot of that it gets you going, especially when you have your home crowd. And they've been shooting the most threes of anybody in the playoffs this year, including Houston Rockets and the Golden State Warriors. That is a major part of their game, and they have to be consistent in that if they're going to beat this Washington Wizards team. And final point I'll make on this, too, is listen, John Wall is a beast, and we all know that. He had a great game one, 20 points, 16 assists. But what you don't realize is the 8 turnovers that you had, and you alluded to guys like Avery Bradley, guys like Marcus Smart. They helped, and they spied, and they did a lot to really deter John Wall from having the kind of game that he probably could have had, where he could have had maybe 30 and 16 as opposed to 20 and 16. I think he did a good job of getting rid of the ball out of the double teams, but he's so many strips they had on Wall and even some block shots against him as well too. And I think if they can keep that type of defense, then they will really be in good shape.
All right, Shaw. One of our listeners here on the show actually posted a pretty interesting question on Twitter, and I'm going to actually ask this to you before we start shifting our focus to the second half of the Eastern Conference semifinal round matchup between the Toronto Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And this is in reference to the injury to Markieff Morris. So Markieff Morris goes down with an injury. He is expected to play game 2 in this matchup. To me, the equalizer is finally the emergence of Al Horford for the Boston Celtics. Almost had himself a triple-double, which when you get Al Horford to contribute across the board on the stat sheets, then I will tell you very loudly that the Boston Celtics will bowl well. And at least in this matchup, they could wind up being the winner of every single game if you're going to tell me that Al Horford's going to start posting triple-double type numbers to help that front court. But then again, now, my question to you is this, Shaw, when it comes to Markieff Morris. Where will his biggest contribution be to help this Wizards get past the Boston Celtics? Will it be from the offensive end of the basketball, or will it be from the defensive end of the basketball?
Well, it's more so from offense, I think, if you're talking about Markieff, simply because if the Celtics decide to go small and have Horford at center, so to speak, at times, there are times where the Wizards are comfortable playing Markieff at center. And there was a point in this game where he drove past Horford and was able to get like a nice little floater over him or whatever the case may be. I think Markieff can attack Horford in small lineups for the Washington Wizards if he's healthy. And as a guy who, if he's dedicated and obviously healthy, he can rebound, which we all know is the Celtics' Achilles heel. So he means more for them offensively than he does defensively. I don't think he's going to be out there really stopping anybody so much. And other than Horford, the Celtics bigs really aren't that difficult to guard. And again, Olynyk had a nice game today, but I don't think he's unguardable. I think Markieff being aggressive offensively, being a guy that can even kind of pick and pop with Wall and some of those plays out there as well too, and drive by Horford at times. That's where his biggest contribution is going to be.
All right, big shout outs to our man L.A. Brodus
for Lamont.
Yep, he's throwing us the Q&A to help us kind of break this down. All right, so let's get right into it. Who's moving on? How many games?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to back off what I've claimed to. I've been very Celtics
Celtic-centric,
yeah,
yes.
In our conversation here, but my original prediction to when we play also again is that the Wizards are the second best team in the Eastern Conference. So again, if they don't have Markieff, this is a problematic matchup for them against Boston. If Markieff comes back, I still think the Wizards win this series in 7 games. I still think they're the better overall team. I don't know that they'll be able to shoot nearly 50% from 3, again in this series. And Horford, as good as he's been, and he has been the clear number 2, can you really put up triple-double type numbers? Can Jay Crowder score 24 points and shoot 6 of 8 from the three-point line and all of that? I can't see that happening. I think Washington's going to find a way to get themselves together a little bit and get some better production out of their bench. So I got the Wizards in 7. What you got?
Wow, man, this is probably going to be the first time that I can actually feel a little Celtic-centric. Because I certainly didn't feel that way if once I knew that the Boston Celtics were taking on the Chicago Bulls in the first round. I had my doubts, and Shaw probably, I deserve to get gangrened for it. I should have had a lot more optimism for the Boston Celtics, right? I like the Boston Celtics in this matchup against the Washington Wizards. No disrespect. Listen, I've been riding the Wizards train throughout the course of the regular season. Much more to prove myself that this is exactly what happens when you have guys that play together and have a level of continuity, and then you have a quality head coach that knows what to do with those players. But this comes to exactly what we say. Defense wins championships. And my expectation is if the Boston Celtics are going to continue to force the Washington Wizards to only 16 points in the third quarter. And I remember way back when the Celtics played the Los Angeles Lakers, and Phil Jackson said these words, the very words that he found his Lakers were not equipped to deal with those 2008 Celtics, when he said, we need to win the third quarter. If the Boston Celtics expect to move on to the conference finals, they have to win the third quarters of every single one of these games, because the Washington Wizards, throughout the course of this regular season, have shown you that they can play one half of superior basketball, and then they can have one of those other type of halves where they can be got. And if the Celtics win the third quarter of each and every single one of these matchups through the course of through the semifinals, they can find themselves playing in the Eastern Conference Finals. With that being said, I'm looking at the Boston Celtics to take out the Washington Wizards, Shaw, in 7 games. You have the Wizards, I have the Celtics. My big concern more than anything, man, is can the Celtics get what they got out of Gerald Green? Because I saw something there that I didn't think I would see. And kudos to Brad Stevens for showing that and making it happen quickly when he saw that there was just no effective play with Amir Johnson in the starting lineup against the Chicago Bulls. He inserted Gerald Green, and Gerald Green was like, like a spark, like he was a catalyst. He didn't do anything in this game, but I don't think that that's going to be the case through the course of a series where the Washington Wizards can always give you opportunities to have exposed matchups.
Well, and I think that's a great point overall, but that's what it's always about, right? When it comes to the playoffs is, who do you plug in now and who's going to give you some minutes and help out, and even if it's for a 5 or 6 minute stretch, again, like Brad Stevens put in Jaylen Brown today in the fourth quarter when Washington was kind of cutting into that 15-point lead that Boston had built going into the fourth quarter. Jaylen Brown, again, it doesn't look sexy, but those 6 minutes were very effective. So I think that's where Washington now has to kind of go back. If Markieff is out, do they now just go ahead and start Oubre as their starting power forward, if you will? And then guys like Jason Smith and Brandon Jennings and all those guys now have to kind of figure out a way to be effective coming off the bench. Again, it's always about these chess moves, one way or the other. And I think, and that's why I keep saying which team's bench produces the most throughout the series is really who should win the series overall.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This is our conference semifinal predictions. My man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA is his Twitter handle. At GameFace Lee is mine. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the other half of the Eastern Conference semifinal matchup. And this is actually the matchup that took place in the Eastern Conference Finals for last season between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Toronto Raptors. Now, you can make the argument that the Raptors and the Cavaliers, respectively, are 1 and 2. Just so happens that seedings go. The Cleveland Cavaliers are the 2 seed, and the Toronto Raptors are the 3 seed. Make no bones about it. The Toronto Raptors came fresh off of a hellacious series with the Milwaukee Bucks. Even though it was 6 games, it was a grueling 6 games. And much can be said about the Cleveland Cavaliers, who, while they coasted in a sweep to the Indiana Pacers, there were a couple of tidal waves by the Indiana Pacers play, pushing the Cleveland Cavaliers in the fourth quarter each and every single game. So now the big question lies, Shaw, with this new look of the Toronto Raptors, with the trade deadline moves of getting PJ Tucker and Serge Ibaka, is this team capable and ready to make a run to dethrone the king and his squires out in Cleveland?
The Raptors are a very good, solid basketball team, and they did exactly what they needed to do to be competitive against the Cleveland Cavaliers in a 7-game series. Do I think they're going to beat LeBron James and the Cavs? No, not really.
Well, that kind of smirk, you basically gave it away. Like, there's no sense in me asking you at the end of our conversation, who do you think is going to win it? Don't, at least keep our listeners guessing, Shaw. I'm like, damn, man.
Like I said, I feel like they've done everything they needed to do to really kind of match up with Cleveland in a way that not many teams are going to be able to. The question that you have here is, listen, no matter what seems to happen, Lowry and DeRozan seem to have like these funks one way or the other. DeRozan seemed to be a little bit more consistent this year. Lowry had some struggles in that first round against the Milwaukee Bucks, but the Bucks are very long and they're rangy and they defend pretty well. Cleveland does not. So maybe this is a year where the Raptors, get over the hump, if you will, to some degree, if they can stay consistent with their shot. And having guys like Serge Ibaka to put pressure on Kevin Love offensively and defensively, and a guy like PJ Tucker to kind of help DeMar Carroll try to keep LeBron out of the paint and just facilitating for all of his teammates as well too, and that gives them a good chance. But Toronto has to be consistent offensively because I think they're going to be there defensively. I'm just not convinced that they're going to be an offensive juggernaut. And now what happens in the second round too, it makes me wonder because the adjustments that are made in the first round for teams don't necessarily translate now to the second round because again, it's a new series, it's a new team that presents new matchups. So where they brought Jonas Valanciunas off the bench and inserted Norman Powell into the starting lineup, is that something that Dwayne Casey is going to continue to do now? Or does Valanciunas go back in there to try to give them some post presence and some rebounding?
Man, this is tough, Shaw, because there's so many ways that you can look at this. Here's the thing. I don't know if I can look at the previous series numbers to really help give you a better depiction of what we're trying to predict with regards to this series. Do I think that the Toronto Raptors have improved as a basketball team to compete with the Cleveland Cavaliers? Yes, I do. Do I think that the Cleveland Cavaliers may have taken a step back in what they needed to do to prepare themselves to make the historic run they made last year to win an NBA championship? I do believe so. But the question is, when it comes to these two teams and how they're matched up against each other, who seems to mask their flaws better? And to me, there's no greater flaw when you can't figure out why you can't consistently get dominant backcourt play from arguably two of your premier top 15, we want to say, Shaw, when you look at it holistically, with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, top 15 type players in the NBA, possibly, with the way that they play. These guys, they don't do it consistently enough. They'll give it to you in spurts, but they don't seem to, and it happens at the worst possible time. I'm not saying these guys are choke artists. I'm just saying the worst part of their game seems to be exposed at the highest point of competitiveness. Whereas, do you think you ever have to worry about that with Kyrie Irving? Do you think you have to worry about that with LeBron James? I mean, does it really matter if it should happen like that for Kevin Love? Because to me, what it really comes down to is Dwayne Casey has to figure out a way to take out one of those two dudes. It's either Kyrie Irving or LeBron James. And quite honestly, he should put the onus and the pressure on Kevin Love to be the star player for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think only then will you kind of start seeing a little bit of the chink in the armor, so to speak, when it comes to this Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team. But as long as Kyrie Irving and LeBron James dictate the pace, the flow, how they want their game to mature through the course of a series, they will always wind up being the favored team, no matter what roster Dwayne Casey, Masai Ujiri, and the whole Canadian border, the North American continent decides to throw at the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because there's nothing that's giving you that utter confidence with DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, amongst other type backcourt combinations where you might see the fear in other oppositions when those guys get on the court. There's nothing that's giving the Cavaliers room to pause a little bit and try to figure out and game plan, on how to defeat the Toronto Raptors. And then I think in itself, it juxtaposes the way that Casey has to rely on the confidence of other guys on the court to contribute when their guys are not putting those numbers up to keep them competitive through the course of a series.
Well, and I think that's why we're going to have to focus on the play of Ibaka. Where Lowry and DeRozan, and again, we know that they should be elite level. They are an elite level backcourt. And if they can be consistent, then Toronto is going to be successful no matter what. But if they struggle, that's when it really boils down to which Toronto Raptor guy comes up here and steps up and plays big. Now, the reason I brought up Valanciunas earlier was because he played great versus them in the series last year before he got hurt. And so if he can go back into the starting lineup now and really just kind of be a bruiser and be a guy who can, give them some post presence and get them some touches and a couple offensive rebounds and make sure that the Cavs don't get second chance points on the defensive glass, then again, it really changes the complexion of the series. But then a guy like Ibaka as well, too, who can now, at least in theory, put real pressure on Kevin Love. We know Love. I mean, we all know Love is not a great defender, but if Ibaka's out there on pick and pop and making Love kind of chase him down a little bit, and even if he's stretching out three some, and then Ibaka has the ability to be mobile and stay with Kevin Love defensively, that's where it comes into the, how consistent will the Raptors be? Can they really push the Cleveland Cavaliers in a 7-game series here? I think they have the pieces in place. We just haven't seen them do it yet because we haven't seen this version of them reach this far in the playoffs, especially with Ibaka and PJ Tucker now on the roster.
It's something that I wanted to kind of pick your brain on, Shaw, because this is the same problem that we've had with Serge Ibaka, even when he played with the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's kind of the worry that I guess we tended to wonder about with Kevin Love, so to speak, being that alpha dog player from Minnesota and then suddenly suppressing, his kind of game, the way he plays his game, because he's now, option C in an ABC option, over in Cleveland. With Serge Ibaka, one of the things that I just don't quite understand is a guy with his physical size, with his and listen, he's not like he's, over the hill. It's not like the guy's like 36, 37 years old. The guy's, what? He's barely 30. Like, he's just pushed past 30. You know what I mean? Like, This guy still has athleticism and still has physical strength that he can dominate down low if he really wanted to. And what I just don't seem to understand is why isn't it that he doesn't think in with a high basketball IQ, force guys like Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love into early foul trouble? Why is it that he falls in love with shooting the three or distancing himself and not really getting underneath, the teeth? I almost feel like there needs to be like a Blake Griffin face mask on every single player that he plays against, because that's the only time that you see any kind of physicality from Serge Ibaka on a consistent basis. If it's not Blake Griffin, everyone else he plays down to where his matchup should actually favor him than favor against him. And I'm just curious, Shaw, why isn't like someone like Dwayne, like Dwayne Casey doesn't instill that upon him? Because I think they're going to need that in a series where they should have a favorable front court matchup.
Well, I like what you're saying there. If Casey can get into the head of Ibaka and say, listen, you're going to go down there and punish this dude, then I think you'll probably see them, at times, depending on what the lineup is, maybe Tristan will switch on to him if Ibaka's trying to post up some. But then, that would leave Valanciunas, in theory, less to kind of run around. But you have to realize, too, is that the Raptors, I think, in very small sets, were running Ibaka at the 5 and putting Tucker at the 4, and and not having those kind of that small lineup out there. It really just depends what sets that they want to try to run against this Cavaliers roster, because again, we don't know, we haven't seen them in this form. But again, I love what you're saying there, because Ibaka has the ability and chance to be extremely physical against a guy like Kevin Love and kind of put him in the pseudo torture chamber. Now, Ibaka's not an amazing post player, so and that's where you kind of get him into.
To your point, I don't think he has to be an amazing post player, but he should establish a post presence.
Yeah, I think you should take him down there and put him on his back and try to shoot a jump hook and even a turnaround. He can hit the fadeaway from 10 feet or so, where the case may be, with Love, and get him to bite on some ball fakes and things of that nature. So I definitely agree with you. But it's just a matter of is that the strategy where they want to employ that? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to. And I know you're not saying this, but you're not trying to play through Ibaka, but you're trying to still make him effective out there to make sure that Kevin Love is not staying fresh out there, and so that he can hurt you offensively.
Listen, I just have a problem with, that there's a player out there with a weakness, and you're not doing what you can to exploit that weakness. It's kind of like when you go out and we play pickup games, right? And the guy comes out and, he chooses his team and he gets 4 really strong players. And, you get those 4 strong players. Why? Because, you want to win. You want to stay on the court, right? You may be the weakest player. And listen, the guys that are on that court that just won, they know who the weakest player is. So what do? They go and they, like you said, Shaw, they put you in the torture chamber. They put you in that headlock. They make it hurt. They make those 4 players look at you funny like, man, I don't know how we're going to win with having this guy on there, because they're going to continue to keep going at that guy until you prove that you are actually as equally a necessity to help win those games for your other guys on the court. You will be a liability. And when you come off the court, ain't nobody going to pick you. So you're always playing not just to stay on the court, but you're also playing that when you come off the court, that somebody doesn't look at you as the weakest player. And I just feel like there are times where maybe even to some degree, because of the height and the magnitude of the Cleveland Cavaliers and, it's LeBron James led teams or whatever, they completely overanalyze this. There are weak players on that basketball team. You know what I'm saying? DeMar DeRozan should be abusing anyone who is in the 2-guard position until LeBron James takes it upon himself that he needs to guard DeMar DeRozan. Up until then, there is no excuse for DeMar DeRozan to have subpar games against the likes of J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert and whoever, Darren Williams, whoever that Tyronn Lue's got to play patchwork orange in the 2-guard position to hold up. Kyle Lowry should be abusing Kyrie Irving, putting him down on the blocks, put him in a torture chamber. Even if he jacks up bricks, Shaw, he should still be punishing Kyrie Irving, because then you know what? All that energy spent on defensive efforts to stop Kyle Lowry is going to show when he has to make offensive moves on the opposite end of the basketball court. And it just boggles my mind how the Toronto Raptors continuously plays into the hands of their opposition rather than them being the ones to dictate the way that they want to play through the course of an NBA series of this magnitude.
Well, I think there's a lot that you've said there that makes me kind of, gives me some strategy that I like to discuss here. I think, you see the Raptors, they run a lot of offense. Obviously, they're very pick and roll heavy, especially if they might send Ibaka and Valanciunas, on either side to come and pick for Lowry sometimes, and maybe even DeRozan. And Ibaka is an okay passer. Valanciunas maybe not so much, obviously. But I think you see the Cavs run a lot of 1-3 pick and roll with Kyrie and LeBron. I think the Raptors should probably do the same thing and maybe run a lot of 1-2 pick and roll. And whoever Kyrie is trying to guard, well, that's who you run the pick and roll with. You know what I mean?
Right.
You go try to figure that out and make him defend. And I mean, again, to Kyrie's credit, he's not going to back down. He's going to at least try to be up for the challenge. But that is probably going to force Cleveland to send help. And again, they're not a very disciplined defensive team. So if I'm doing Casey, I'm running a lot of 1 and 2 pick and roll when Lowry and DeRozan out there, and I'm going to use my bigs to make sure that they're knocking some of the Cavaliers off of their block as well too. So in short, if the Raptors make this a very physical series, and use their advantages where they have it, and then to get a guy like PJ Tucker in there as well too to kind of bang around and maybe help them get some offensive rebounds too. Like I said, it could be a very entertaining series one way or the other.
All right. Well, I'm not even going to waste my time and ask you, Shaw, who do you think is going to win and how many games? You already did the, you know what I'm saying, earlier on when we had this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go ahead and lead in with my predictions, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the Western Conference semifinal matchups. Look, in the regular season, the Cleveland Cavaliers took 3 or 4 from the Toronto Raptors, and with good reason. The Toronto Raptors, I really feel like the Toronto Raptors have, given what they went through last year and going through everything through the course of this season, not winning the division, but still, being a high seed in the playoffs and going through a tough run against the Milwaukee Bucks, I feel like they somehow, some way have lost their identity. And I think much in my little tirade, my little soliloquy, that's just a moment ago, with some of these mismatches and maybe overanalyzing the way that they should be playing, and they play down to their competition. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the Toronto Raptors are superior to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm just saying that the Toronto Raptors have favorable matchups that they seem to just walk away from. Not even get away from, they just walk away from it. They just completely abandon it. And that's an identity problem. And Dwayne Casey, if he expects to win this series against Tyronn Lue, it's not going to be through, superior X's and O's. It's got to be, he's got to figure out a way to mentally get his guys together and stay in the moment of executing the game plan, whatever the hell that's going to be. I just don't think it's enough time for them to do it. And certainly with the way that the Bucks played them in the first round of this series is not helping them whatsoever. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers take out the Raptors in 6 games. All right, Shaw, you can go ahead now.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to go with that same prediction. Cavs in 6. I think, again, the Raptors are too good to, not win a couple games in this series one way or the other. But I think it's going to be very reminiscent of last year's outcome, per se. And real quick, before I move on, I just kind of want to, get your take on this. Who are your X factors, I guess, for both teams, going into this? Again, I think we've talked about it a lot. For me, I think Ibaka has to have a huge series for Toronto. And I think for the Cleveland Cavaliers, I think it's going to be a guy like Channing Frye, coming off the bench, is he able to continue to space the floor, shoot the 3, and really make the Raptors defense kind of rotate when they need, especially if they're going to try to make it more physical. So those are my 2 X factors. Who you got before we move on?
Man, this is tough. I can give you a plethora of X factors for the Toronto Raptors, but it would just defeat the purpose because it's singular, right? Just X factor.
Well, then you just be like everybody.
Yeah, just be like everybody. All right, I'm gonna do it like this, Shaw. We're not gonna get into the starting lineup, guys. I'm gonna go with Norman Powell, and the reason why I'm gonna go with Norman Powell for the Toronto Raptors is because they're gonna need somebody that's gonna have to play with a level of physicality and intensity that I think I saw in that series against the Milwaukee Bucks. I think that was the Powell party came out in the first round, which I think might be helpful for Dwayne Casey, much like how I saw Gerald Green help Brad Stevens kind of equalize that smaller lineup that the Bulls were kind of throwing out there, since they weren't able to physically dominate the front court of the Chicago Bulls. Gerald Green makes it smaller. They got the tempo going and everything. I think Norman Powell is the type of player that can wreak havoc on some of the position players that the Cleveland Cavaliers may wind up coming up with decisive advantages over because of the inept capabilities of their starting players, like guys like Damari Carroll and Jonas Valanciunas. They're going to need something. And I feel like if Norman Powell can come in, his point totals, that's not going to matter. It's just going to be the defensive intensity and the heady play, the 50-50 plays that I think are going to keep the Toronto Raptors in certain games that maybe the Cleveland Cavaliers should be blowing out the Raptors. If he steps up and becomes kind of like an X factor / equalizer, he can certainly make a difference. Now, on the other side of the ball for the Cleveland Cavaliers, I really think that it comes down to Tristan Thompson. I just think that if he stays on the basketball court and he plays the kind of basketball that he's been known to play, offensive rebound galore, the Cleveland Cavaliers can jack up 60 million shots, miss about half of them, and they can still walk away winning this basketball game. But it's going to be his defensive effort clogging the lane and making it, again, difficult for guys like DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry to shoot more difficult shots and easier shots. And because of their inability to be effective scorers consistently, that I think is going to help the Cleveland Cavaliers sustain any kind of run that the Toronto Raptors try and make through the course of the series.
That all makes sense to me, and I think, these are two teams that they know each other very well. And, it will be interesting to see, what the coaches do adjustment wise and which guys really do step up. So, again, I think those are excellent picks and excellent points to make. And, we'll see who's right. You know what I mean? But I think your grander point in terms of almost every Raptor has to play well. I think that really is kind of where Toronto is at. They have to kind of get somebody at least consistently. Maybe if not even the same guy, a different guy needs to step up every night in this series for them to make things work.
Yeah, and can we make sure that we get our man Pascal Siakam out on the basketball court?
Yeah. Wasn't he the D-League MVP, I think, of the D-League championship or something like that?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Can we get a call up, man? I want an announcer, somebody to say Siakam, you know what I'm saying, through the course of the playoffs. Kyle Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast, as we gave you our predictions of the Eastern Conference semifinal round matchups. Toronto Raptors, Cleveland Cavaliers head off the second half of that. So let's go ahead and focus our attention to the Western Conference matchups. First up, this is an intriguing one because we're talking about play of polar opposites. We're talking about the 2-seeded San Antonio Spurs taking on the 3-seeded Houston Rockets. And Shaw, look, man, I know a lot of people might look at this and say, man, there's going to be some ugly basketball being played. But I have a funny feeling about this. I have a feeling that both of these teams are going to unleash a side of them that they haven't had the opportunity to unleash through the course of regular seasons, because you get to play teams with different styles and different matchups. This really comes down to, can better defense stop the better offense, and can better offense, stop the better defense? And I think at certain points through the course of this series between the Spurs and the Rockets, they're going to bring out a side of their polar opposites that I don't think a lot of people will see coming. And I'm anticipating that some of these games are not just going to be in the 80s. They may run up into the hundreds, and you're going to be saying, damn, I didn't know Tony Parker can still play like that. Damn, I didn't know Paul Gasol can still give you double doubles. That's what this series is going to lead to when you're talking about these two teams.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing for me when it comes to the discussion of these two rosters is that San Antonio, obviously they're the higher seed, by obviously a few games being the 2 seed or whatever. But, we all know that they've hung their hat on defense, as you've alluded to. But they are probably one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the league where they can really play any style. And I think where they had to kind of grit and grind it out with Memphis, they played some ugly and physical games with them. And, LaMarcus Aldridge didn't really step into his shot and really, wasn't really aggressive at times. We saw some flashes of Tony Parker, as you alluded to, being aggressive offensively. Now they get to go up against a team with a completely different style, and I think they'll be just fine. It's like, once there's certain teams that can only play one way. Like, we'll talk about the Utah Jazz in a little bit. They can really only play one way. Memphis can only play one way. San Antonio can do it however you like, if you will. And I think for the Rockets, that's going to pose a very, very tough matchup for them throughout the entire series. But again, you can't count them out because they haven't played their best basketball. And you can say that maybe the Thunder didn't make them play their best basketball because their offense wasn't nearly as efficient as it was in the regular season. And if they start to knock down threes and, continue to be aggressive offensively and really, kind of find a way to not necessarily be lockdown defenders, if you will, but you need to have key possessions where you get defensive stops. And that's when guys like Ariza and Capella really step in there and really kind of have to show their moxie a little bit. So this is going to be a great series to watch one way or the other. I think it's going to go deep no matter what happens here. And I'd still love to see what you have to say about it, my dude.
Listen, did I not tell you that the San Antonio Spurs were going to have a go of it with the Memphis Grizzlies? Right? Yeah. The Memphis Grizzlies are just that type of team. And yeah. I know a lot of people talking about, the Memphis Grizzlies and winning, had won against the San Antonio Spurs in like 11 straight affairs leading up into this series, going all the way back to the semifinals when the Memphis Grizzlies, had advanced themselves to the to the Western Conference finals or whatever. Yeah, I understand all of that. I just go back to the fact that there's just certain teams that just bring that dog out of you. And it always seems to be the San Antonio Spurs when it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, can we say the same thing about the Houston Rockets? Not necessarily. And so I agree with your point, Shaw. The San Antonio Spurs, to me, have a much easier time game planning how they want to execute. Because I think that's just what it comes down to when it comes to the Spurs. It's not that this team is so flawed. It's not that, how we talk about teams like the Boston Celtics, or we talk about teams like like the Washington Wizards, where there's so many if factors. No, it just comes down to execution. It just comes down to, if they do what they're supposed to do, this is the team that's going to be in the finals, right? In the Western Conference Finals. No questions asked. They just have too good a lineup and guys that are just too disciplined and too good at executing. Now, if the opposite team, being the Houston Rockets, seems to out execute the San Antonio Spurs, I mean, seriously, what can you say? What can you do? I mean, it's like this. It's like the New England Patriots, right? If the Atlanta Falcons drop 35 points on the New England Patriots, and the Patriots don't make this miraculous comeback, I mean, are you going to come up with excuses for why the Patriots didn't win, as much as you should give kudos to what the Falcons did do? You know what I'm saying? That's how I look at the Houston Rockets. If the Houston Rockets play above their heads, meaning James Harden is averaging Russell Westbrook numbers, Eric Gordon is averaging 20 points per game during the series, Ryan Anderson is averaging a double-double and shooting 56% from three. Trevor Ariza is giving you like 9 assists. Nene no longer has gray hairs underneath his chin, playing against David Lee, LaMarcus Aldridge, and whoever else they're going to throw at the front court, Dwayne Dedmon and all that. I mean, what can you honestly say about the Houston Rockets, right? Like, you should give them their just due. D'Antoni has figured out the key to beat the San Antonio Spurs, at least for 2017. But all signs point to the fact that if Kawhi Leonard is going to average 29 points like he did in the season series against the Rockets, LaMarcus Aldridge can give you a pedestrian 16. Tony Parker can probably give you 15. The Spurs still will take 3 out of 4 games from the Houston Rockets. And even with James Harden averaging 30 points per game against the San Antonio Spurs, everyone else looks pedestrian, because the San Antonio Spurs execute defense better than any of the teams that are left standing in the playoff picture. So with that being said, they have the best go route, so to speak, to get themselves to the finals as long as they execute. But they leave any room for the Houston Rockets to air out against the San Antonio Spurs. And I can definitely tell you that the Houston Rockets will have an opportunity or a chance to beat the Spurs, because they do have more horses to throw at the Spurs. They just don't execute, and they execute consistently like the San Antonio Spurs do.
Well, for me, I'm concerned about San Antonio in terms of if LaMarcus Aldridge is not going to be, kind of a 20-point per game guy in the playoffs, and he averaged 14.8 in the series against Memphis, that could be problematic. And we've all said, I think with San Antonio, they've become very Kawhi heavy. And there was a little Twitter banter going on, I think in one of the games here, it was like all the Spurs' great ball movement has just shut down. It's just pretty much get the ball to Kawhi and get the hell out of the way. And I think if it comes to a matchup where it just needs to be Kawhi against the Houston's offense, that could be problematic for San Antonio. Like, that much I will say. So, but LaMarcus Aldridge has to contribute. But I think on the other side for Houston, a guy like Ryan Anderson needs to get out of his funk. He needs to be out there and giving LaMarcus Aldridge all the hell he can handle, and make him chase him around and chase him off the 3-point line, so that Aldridge can't get into his groove offensively on the other side of the basketball court. So for me, this is really a matchup of some of Houston's kind of rotational type players, if you will, if they can really continue to be consistent, because we know what Harden is going to do. We even know what Lou Williams and Eric Gordon are going to do. It's the rest of those guys, because Nene surprised us in the last series, but I don't think we're going to see that Nene again. Patrick Beverley's, he did what Patrick Beverley does, plays great defense, can even hit the glass hard as a point guard. But it's the guys like Ryan Anderson and Trevor Ariza. Can those guys now finally get their act going and really challenge San Antonio offensively, as well as trying to keep some pressure on Kawhi Leonard defense?
Let me put it like this, Shaw. I'm more concerned about Tony Parker. And I know I say this, like, I nauseate people when I say this, because maybe I'm more of a big believer of Tony Parker than I am about LaMarcus Aldridge. To me, LaMarcus Aldridge is the type of player that Tony Parker would love to give the ball to and tell everyone to get the hell out of the way. I'm sure Kawhi Leonard would feel the same way. Like, yo, give the ball to LaMarcus and get the hell out of the dude's way. The problem is LaMarcus Aldridge, to me, he has that Blake Griffin syndrome. He shows up in some games, doesn't show up in all. But to me, the consistent element here to the effectiveness of Kawhi Leonard, the effectiveness of LaMarcus Aldridge, Paul Gasol even getting quality touches and executing, Patty Mills and how Popovich wants to use it. It all comes down to Tony Parker. It amazes me, Shaw, how, I think at times we in the NBA community, we get away from the things. Listen, no matter how you want to masquerade this, no matter how Greg Popovich wants to play this down, he really still believes that Tony Parker is of the Tony Parker some 3 years ago when they won the title. Okay? He has to believe that. They're going to have to believe that because they never addressed it in the offseason. They never said we're going to give the reins to Patty Mills now and start really dialing down Tony Parker's minutes. They needed a Tony Parker 27-point effort to get them out of the first round against the Memphis Grizzlies. Tony Parker's ability to execute, to penetrate in the teeth of the defense, to get the ball to his playmakers, get them easy shots, it is so critical. And to me, he's now going to be matched up against guys like Patrick Beverley, who are just going to be a nuisance on the basketball court. So it makes me wonder, will Tony Parker outplay guys like Patrick Beverley, guys like Lou Williams? Will he be effective? Because that is what it's going to take for the San Antonio Spurs to show their offensive efficiency, to show their defensive efficiency. And to me, it still goes back to Greg Popovich leaning on Tony Parker. This still comes down. I mean, you're going to ask me, we might as well move on to our X factors. Tony Parker, to me, is the X factor for the San Antonio Spurs, for them to advance easily against the Houston Rockets. If he's ineffective, this gets stretched further than it needs to be and may even open up a window for the Houston Rockets to may shock people and knock off the San Antonio Spurs because he can be a liability at times. But if Tony Parker executes, then I think the Spurs should have a much easier go of getting to the next round.
Well, that seems to be something that we may somewhat disagree on, because I don't know that Parker is going to be.
No, disagree wholeheartedly, man. Disagree all.
I just don't feel like I think what we saw in the Memphis series was, some flashes. I just don't know that he'll be able to do that through the course of the regular playoff series. Now, again, versus Houston with a softer defense, yeah, there's a good possibility he can do that. It really just depends who's going to be defending him. And I don't know what D'Antoni has in store. I mean, is he going to put Ariza on Kawhi, or is he going to try to go smaller and put Beverley on Kawhi, which would then free up Parker to kind of have some free reins out there? Do you challenge Tony Parker at this stage of his career to say, okay, you be the guy to beat us? We're not going to let Kawhi beat us. You have to show that you are still the wily old veteran who can still get it done. And if I'm D'Antoni, as we're talking about it right now, that's what I'd probably do. I'm probably throwing everything I can, the kitchen sink, at Kawhi Leonard and saying, okay, Tony Parker and LaMarcus Aldridge, if you're in the mood to, you go ahead and beat us. I'm not going to let Kawhi go out here and get 30-plus a game against me on a regular basis without it being extremely difficult, trying to make him inefficiently offensively. So it will be interesting to see, though, what defense, and again, we know the Rockets are very offensively capable, and that's what they're offensive minded. But what defenses do they employ to try to slow down what works for San Antonio the best?
Well, Shaw, thank you very much. I appreciate you, going right into it, because that's who my X factor is. It's not even a player for the Houston Rockets. It's D'Antoni. This is what we've been talking about, Shaw. We're going to praise Mike D'Antoni. He's going to get that Coach of the Year award. We're going to be talking about, Mike D'Antoni is back. The Italian stallion is back. Move over Sylvester Stallone. Mike D'Antoni running things once again in the NBA. He has finally found solid footing in Houston, right? And then we're going to go right to this series, and we're going to point our fingers, at least people who've been watching this as it's evolved. Mike D'Antoni is great when it comes to offensively putting his team in the best position to look really good. But when a team forces him to make adjustments, it's exactly what he doesn't do well. He does not make adjustments. He doesn't find the right roster to counteract against something that nullifies what he initiates to start with. Great in the beginning, but when you ask him to do mid-game adjustments, end-game adjustments, little skittish, right? Yeah. And now you're going up against arguably the greatest head coach in NBA history in Greg Popovich. Do you not think that Greg Popovich is going to put the onus on himself to force Mike D'Antoni to make certain roster moves, decisions, to call certain plays, to really step up his level of coaching acumen? That, to me, is going to be the key. It's going to come down, it's going to come down to James Harden shooting that shot. It's going to come down to, those key three-point. But again, what is it that you want your coach to tell your superstar player? Make the right play. And what is it as a coach that you should be doing for your personnel? Put them in the best position to make the right plays. And listen, up until this point, Mike D'Antoni has been ill-afforded to have to pull that out of his hat, right? He's going to have to be put to the test now against the best coach and against arguably one of the best teams in the NBA. And I'm telling you, that could be the downfall for the Houston Rockets. I'm not saying it's going to be all his fault. What I am saying is that at a time when Mike D'Antoni has to come up with answers, it's going to be forced upon him because of the play of the San Antonio Spurs, the discipline of the San Antonio Spurs, the Popovich effect. And that, to me, is what I'm going to be looking for through the course of this series when it comes to Mike D'Antoni. Will he inspire his players to play the kind of basketball necessary to take them to the next round?
Yeah, and that really does remain to be seen, because if you look at their roster, they're not incredibly deep.
Right.
I think, they have some guys who they run out there, and they were able to get production out of guys like Decker and like the things throughout the season, but they're not incredibly deep. It really is kind of Eric Gordon and Lou Williams to come off the bench, and that's really like the extent of it. To be very honest with you, and obviously Nene as well too. So I think if they're able to put pressure on San Antonio, maybe a little bit even on the block, if a guy like Nene can kind of have some of the magic that he had in the first round, then maybe that forces San Antonio to do some adjustments. But when you talk about the adjustments, I do want to see what San Antonio does defensively. I'm sure they'll give James Harden different looks, but will it be Danny Green who starts on him and then Kawhi finishes, or vice versa, or things like that nature? I think they're going to try to bother Harden with length. And they're not going to put Tony Parker on James Harden.
Real quick before we get into the Warriors and the Jazz matchup as our final discussion in the semifinal predictions that I think Danny Green is going to be an interesting look at. I mean, watch very carefully to see how long a leash Greg Popovich has playing Danny Green. Danny Green has always been noted. I think he's always managed to stay a starter because he is a solid two-guard defender, okay? He's going to get put to the test against the likes of James Harden, Eric Gordon, and Lou Williams. And there will come a point where if these guys are getting off early and forcing Popovich to start making adjustments, I just wonder how much confidence Popovich is going to have leaving Danny Green out on that basketball court to deal with those guys before he substitutes to put guys like Jonathan Simmons, more athletic, bigger, like Kyle Anderson, guys like that with length that will cause more disruption at the expense of nullifying his three-point shooting effectiveness that the Spurs do rely on having him on the basketball court. Be very interesting to see how that plays, because Danny Green is one of those type of players where it's feast or famine for him. If he is not hitting his shots early, you'll tend to see his defensive play become affected by it and vice versa.
And I think Popovich has a pulse of his team to kind of figure that out. And that's where the difference is for me, really is in terms of what the bench production is. Whereas Pop can pretty much throw anybody out there. He might throw, Davis Bertans out there for a little bit, and, he'll do all right. And if, Ginobili played terribly the first couple games of that series, came to life. I think it was in Game 5 a little bit. All those little X factors you kind of have to worry about with San Antonio, where I don't think you have the same depth of worry that with the San Antonio bench that you do with the Houston Rockets bench, vice versa of that. The Rockets bench it's Williams and Gordon, and that's offense only. And it depends on whether or not Nene is going to be able to come in here and be effective, as I alluded to a little bit earlier on. So yeah, this is going to be a very tough series, but to give my prediction here, I think the San Antonio Spurs take out the Houston Rockets in 6 games. And again, it's going to be very competitive. I think like you alluded to, we will see some very high-scoring affairs throughout. But San Antonio is just too good and they have too many styles. Like Wu-Tang in this piece. They have too many styles that they can beat you with and can spit at you to take you out. And I like the Spurs in 6.
All right, San Antonio Spurs in 6 for me as well too, Shaw. Look, when the Spurs score over 100 points against the Rockets, they win. If the Houston Rockets show any semblance of defense, they actually win the basketball game. Go figure, right? So, and I'm not confident that the Houston Rockets are going to be capable of shutting down the San Antonio Spurs, underneath 100 points through the course of a 7-game series. It's just very less likely. It's more likely that the Houston Rockets will have to score at least 115 To me, that's what it comes down to. Whoever scores 115 between these two teams essentially wins the basketball game. And I'm more leaning to the idea that the Spurs are capable of doing that more effectively and efficiently than I do about the Houston Rockets. Because the Houston Rockets, to me, defensively, I think at times, can make the San Antonio Spurs look like the Golden State Warriors. So it's going to have to be a run and gun type offense. They're going to have to try to run the San Antonio Spurs out of the gym. I just don't know if they can do that for 7 games. Callie, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, as we give you our predictions for the semifinal matchups. We did the Eastern Conference earlier on. We just finished up with the first half of the Western Conference semifinal matchup between the San Antonio Spurs and Houston Rockets. And now we kind of end things off with the final matchup of the Western Conference semifinal round, and that's between the Golden State Warriors and the Utah Jazz. Hard for us to imagine that we're going to say that. We definitely encourage our peoples to check out the Baseline NBA podcast as we give you our coverage of the Gon' Get segment, and we'll have a lot to say about the Los Angeles Clippers, who we thought were supposed to be representing the other half of this matchup, Shaw. But it is the Utah Jazz, and it is among one of the best teams defensively in the NBA. They just happen to be going against amongst one of the most potent offensive teams in the NBA. So let's break it down, Shaw. Go ahead. Give me what you see as the good, the bad, and certainly what could possibly be the ugly with this matchup.
Well, kudos to the Jazz for making it to the second round, first and foremost. And I think this is going to go a long way. And
that alone should give Quinn Snyder Coach of the Year, by the way, just so you know.
Or Dennis Lindsey, General Manager of the Year for you. Because, again, it really was their veteran, the guys who kind of got them over the hump against the Clippers. Boris Diaw, George Hill, and Joe Johnson played tremendously to make this happen in a 7-game series, especially to go in on the road in a Game 7 and get that W against a Clippers team that we know was, wasn't fully healthy or whatever the case may be. But against Golden State, you're looking for the Utah Jazz to really see if they can slow the pace down a little bit, and get Golden State out of their game with some of their length and giving them some tough shots defensively. And will they be able to be consistent offensively on a regular basis? Will Joe Johnson continue to have the same success that he had against the LA Clippers? In a matchup against the Golden State Warriors? Will their veterans in general continue to do all those things? Is Gobert healthy enough to contribute and continue to keep the glass clean and keep the Warriors out of the paint? Making them have to shoot threes as opposed to getting into the lane which opens up the 3-point shooting on a regular basis. That for me is really where Utah kind of has to hang their hat. They can't change anything. They have to be the defensive stalwarts that they've continued to be the entire season. But to continue to get their veterans to really be a key factor in this as well. And again, for them, it's all uncharted territory. So you just don't know how they're going to play. We know the veterans have been there before, but Gordon Hayward now, is this where how do you handle this? Rodney Hood, Joe Ingles, can all of you guys now really kind of step up into this and take this kind of pressure, taking on what everybody feels is going to be eventually the NBA champion? If Utah handles that pressure well, continues to play defense, and then they'll be fine throughout this series. Again, I don't know if that they can win the series per se, but they can definitely make it competitive and give Golden State all they can handle.
Man, who would have thought that the Utah Jazz would be in this type of position? And I'm not saying this to sound discouraging, playing against the Golden State Warriors. Look, I'm sure Quinn Snyder and all those guys are excited about this opportunity to play, the elite of the elite, right? For a moment, y'all, let's just move Kevin Durant out of the picture. I mean, I know he's not 100%, and you know what he's going to do when he gets on this basketball court. He's absolutely a game changer. But I honestly feel that the game changer for the Golden State Warriors is Draymond Green. That man played like a beast against the Portland Trailblazers in the first round. And I'm not talking about this from the perspective of, his ability to D up. I think it's just his all around play, his temperament, his attitude. I mean, listen, the Golden State Warriors allowed McCullough and Lillard to drop, 74, 81 points, and they still walked away with a victory. Under those circumstances, in any other matchup, the Portland Trailblazers should have won that basketball game. And yet, Draymond Green and those things that we don't talk about because you have to look very closely at the stat sheet, or you got to look through the duration of a basketball game, a key defensive stop, a key switch, a key steal, a key block, a key rebound. Draymond Green was all over that. And I feel like when that type of Draymond Green is on the basketball court, there is nobody right now in the NBA, arguably, maybe next to LeBron James, that's going to be able to stop that type of momentum. And as much as I applaud the Utah Jazz for doing what they needed to do to get past the Los Angeles Clippers, albeit that they didn't have Blake Griffin, which I don't think would have mattered anyway, what Draymond Green brings to the table, I don't think anyone on the Jazz roster will have an answer for, despite the magnanimous effort by Derek Favors, despite Rudy Gobert coming back off of a serious knee injury and inspiring them to play themselves to the next round. There is no answer for what Draymond Green is riding off of, fresh off of what he did for the Portland Trailblazers. If he maintains this kind of level of play, Shaw, oh my God, this is a sweep. It is an absolute sweep. Not because of Steph Curry or Klay Thompson or Kevin Durant. It's because the Utah Jazz, where they can be effective in their front court, will be nullified by one man, and that being Draymond Green, that Saginaw boy bringing that thuggery to the basketball court. They ain't seen physicality yet, but they will in this series.
Yeah, and that is really a huge key. I think a lot of people look at Steph Curry and Kevin Durant as kind of the heads of the snake for the Golden State Warriors, but it really is Draymond offensively and defensively. Draymond is a huge catalyst for them on offense, and we know KD can create, and we know Curry can create. So it's not like just taking Draymond away per se is going to make it all go away. Like, we all know that, but I think if you can not give them the ability, or not give Draymond the ability to get into the lane and maybe even dribble the ball up and kind of unhinged, if you will, that can really kind of throw some sort of a monkey wrench into what Golden State likes to do offensively. And you're going to force KD and Curry to kind of hand the ball more, because what they've been able to do is play off the ball, and they're great, getting open spot up shots and jumpers like of that nature. Like they can do that very easily. And I think if a guy like Favors is healthy enough to at least try to match the physicality of Draymond at times, that can probably maybe be Utah's benefit and to their advantage, throwing Draymond out of his game, and again not making him be the catalyst for them offensively. But as you alluded to, Draymond just seems to be undeterred by anything. And if he plays his normal game, he plays anything like he did in the Portland series, then yeah, this would be a very, very short series. And although I won't say the Utah Jazz are just happy to be here, they may end up just having to take that, kind of as their parting gift. Hey, just be happy you made it here, because this Golden State team is really, really tough.
Yeah, I think the other key too, when you talk about this Golden State Warriors team, something that the Utah Jazz was able to do against the Los Angeles Clippers is they nullified the Los Angeles Clippers' ability to fast break. The Golden State Warriors are among the best teams in the NBA when it comes to fast break points. They average, right now in their own matchup between those two, they average around 23 points, per game per the matchup against the Utah Jazz, whereas the Utah Jazz can only muster up about 8 points. So that already tells you that the Utah Jazz, for them to have any chance of winning, they have to execute in the half court offense, because it looks like the Golden State Warriors are just too athletic and they are too good in nullifying other teams and their ability to score in transition. So if you're the Utah Jazz, either you need to play better on the open floor when the opportunities present itself, and the Golden State Warriors will give you that opportunity, or you need to figure out a way to slow down the Golden State Warriors from their ability to do that. And part of that is their effectiveness in rebounding the basketball. And I think that's going to be a tough sell, because while the Utah Jazz have a bigger lineup, so to speak, I don't know how effective they are per se when playing up against a team like the Golden State Warriors. Remember, you still got Kevin Durant, you've got Draymond Green, Zaza Pachulia whenever, he decides to show up, JaVale McGee. There's length there. And it just, to what I'm saying is that it makes it difficult when rebounding the basketball isn't as effortless as it kind of was in this first series against the Los Angeles Clippers. The Warriors may not look like a solid team to rebound the ball, but they'll make it effectively difficult for the team who should be rebounding the basketball better than them in this type of series.
Yeah, well, I think one of the keys for Utah that I'll be looking at, when even outside of the rebounding, will be, again, we already talked about the veterans per se, but it will be some of the bench play as well too. Rodney Hood, can he be a guy who can be a spark plug for them offensively and be a capable defender when he's out there as well too? So those are the type of things that Utah is going to need. We talked a little bit earlier on about how the Raptors just kind of need everything to kind of go right, and everybody to maybe, different guys to step up on a regular basis. That's what it is for Utah. They will have to control the glass and be physical inside and all of those things too, but they will need guys to play out of themselves ordinarily offensively to make sure that they can just match shots with Golden State. And it is going to come from guys like George Hill at the point guard position, putting pressure on Steph, It's going to come from guys like Rodney Hood coming off the bench and being able to score on a regular basis. Joe Johnson, as we alluded to a little bit earlier as well, too. So, and even Favors, when he's on the court, not just being a defender, being a guy who can, hit the mid-range jumper like he did in Game 7 versus the LA Clippers and rebound as well, too. So, again, they're in for a war of a series in terms of, trying to get over the overall talent that the Warriors have in general. But again, they're not just happy to be here, but we'll have to see if they can actually take a game or two from Golden State.
I got 2 quick questions for you, Shaw, before we get right into our predictions and wrap up our show here. The first question to you is in reference to the Utah Jazz. Interesting move by Quinn Snyder in the first round of the series, putting out Joe Ingles and what he was able to do and the effectiveness. Does Quinn Snyder lean on Joe Ingles in this series, given what he was effectively doing for the Jazz, opening up the floor, dishing the basketball? He played the 2-guard position particularly pretty well, all things considered, right? And then Klay Thompson, right? Klay Thompson only averaged 9 points per game in the matchups against the Utah Jazz. Is this an opportunity for him to break out? Because I know that he is definitely going to be needed if and when they eventually put themselves in a position to play in the Western Conference Finals. Will this give him an opportunity for him to break out? Should Quinn Snyder go the role of playing Joe Ingles?
Well, I think that's an interesting question because Ingles was really there to play defense on JJ Redick. You know what I mean? And he shut Redick down. Now, Klay Thompson is no JJ Redick. You know what I mean? Or JJ Redick is no Klay Thompson, I should say, the other way around. It's not the same thing, but they are similar in terms of like Klay likes to run off ball screens and catch off pin downs and things of that nature. And Ingles had a height advantage over Redick and was able to really affect the shot. He won't have that same advantage over Klay Thompson, but I think in terms of trying to just be physical and be a deterrent for Klay, that is where I don't know if Thompson's really going to get off in this series if Quinn Snyder continues to do that. So I think, at least for the first game, you definitely you continue to run with Joe Ingles out there because he knows his role. Defensively, he's just going to try to run around.
I'm just wondering how long it'll be before Snyder might have to throw Rodney Hood out there to neutralize the athleticism of Klay Thompson. Because, there are moments where Klay Thompson will relinquish himself from getting 3 happy and, get a couple of easy baskets within the perimeter simply because he has a nice little dribble drive and his 6'8" frame. He can shoot over most guys. I just wonder how long it'll be before Joe Ingles' defensive, disciplinary skills, say his wizardry on the defensive side of the basketball gets exposed against the Golden State Warriors.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think Snyder's going to at least try it, and he's not going to make too many changes, I think, initially. Ingles will get a shot to be a problem for Klay. And if he's not, then he'll make a change. And I think he's proven that he at least understands that, even though it's his first time coaching this Jazz team in the playoffs, that, hey, it is about adjustments. And I don't think he's afraid to make those moves. And this is a team that, I don't know, I should have the stats in front of me, how many different 3 and 4 and 5 man lineups they played out there. But remember, they've had so many different guys hurt throughout the entire year and even over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that they all know how to play with each other. It doesn't really matter who's on the floor. They all know how to kind of do their role and do their parts, no matter what the lineup really tends to yield. But again, Golden State is a different animal. So we'll see what Snyder does, but I think this is going to be a tough
animal
series.
In a different jungle.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Absolutely.
all together, man. All
but
right,
I am
Sean.
happy. But I'm happy it's not the Clippers. I mean, to be honest with you, it's just because the Clippers just would have got rolled on, and that serves nobody any good or any service. So Utah, go ahead and get this experience and see what you can do with it.
That's just not even right.
Yeah,
Listen, you'll have plenty of opportunity for you to say to let me know how you really feel about this Los Angeles Clippers team with our next show where we break down all of the teams that have been ousted out of the first round, Shaw. So and trust me, I got a few things I need to kind of let off my chest, so to speak. So yeah, that in itself, man, very well stated. Very well stated. All right, brother. What we got now? How many games? I think it's a foregone conclusion that you're saying that the Warriors should be moving on to the next round. So how many games are they doing it?
Yeah, I got Golden State in 5. I think Utah will get 1 on their home floor. But then their series will pivot back to Golden State, and that'll be a wrap. But again, obviously it could very well go the way of a sweep too, but I think Utah, they just have a lot of playoff moxie in terms of their veterans. They're veteran guys who I think can lead them, especially in a home arena that's very volatile, and Golden State might just be kind of caught off kilter for a little bit. And they have a lot going on with their team, and too, Steve Kerr doesn't look like he's going to be back anytime soon right now. So although they're very talented on the court as well too, you don't want to take away from the fact what Kerr does for them stability-wise on the sidelines. So I think if anything, Utah may be able to capitalize on that on their home floor. But yeah, it's going to be Golden State in 5.
if you are the San Antonio Spurs and you are the Houston Rockets, whoever decides to get out of that half of the bracket to make it to the Western Conference Finals, you just better pray that the Utah Jazz does whatever they can do to stymie Steph Curry. Listen, we talked about this. Steph Curry has a little bit of basketball redemption to work on, right? And it's these type of series that gives him a platform for him to start building up the resume of why he's a two-time MVP, an NBA champion, so forth and so on. He's not looked good when he's come into the playoffs. Now, last year we attributed that to injury. The year before we contributed that to the yips, I guess. All right. Or are we going to actually start etching this in his legacy because he has the comfort of guys like Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, and a relatively easy series? I mean, this is why you take care of your business in the regular season, right? So that you have the most favorable matchups to get yourself to the easiest path to the conference finals. But this to me is a proving ground. Like, Steph Curry needs to put himself in rhythm. He needs to put his team in rhythm. And this is the perfect opportunity to do it. You do it at the expense of one of the better teams defensively. They may be hobbled, but they certainly have proven their worth. They've proven that they are an admirable adversary. So I still, to your point, Shaw, I think the Warriors will do it in 5, but I'm just more intrigued about who is going to use this series as a platform to get off. I don't worry about Kevin Durant because I think it's going to be for the Western Conference Finals that we're going to need to see that KD that wants to be back in the finals. What I want to see is how Steph Curry can elevate his game to be the person that we say that he should have been, that may have saved the Warriors from ever having to go after Kevin Durant this past offseason if he handled his business. Would this have been the same team with Barnes and Bogut one more year? And I think part of that is the proving ground, and this is an opportunity for him to do it. He needs to break George Hill's ankles. He needs to shed off of Joe Ingles. He needs to make, Joe Johnson look, Joe Schmo, and, does whatever he needs to do to start looking like that dude of being one of the top 5 players in the playoffs, not just in the NBA.
Well, I mean, I think that, that's a very interesting, assessment with you, because I don't think Curry's been bad. I think he's been great since KD's been out. And then in this playoffs, he's still leading them in scoring at 25.3 per game, shooting over 50%. Shooting 47%, shooting 41
right,
from
but I'm
three,
talking about the resume, show. I'm not talking about he's just looked awful. No, he's looked impressive. But remember, when you looked at his resume last year, he looked pretty impressive in some games, and the numbers looked a little juiced because of it. You know what I mean? It wasn't as if, like, what we were getting from Steph Curry, we were getting that vibe that he should be that guy right then and there. And I'm just saying that as we get to this point in the series, semifinal, we get to the finals, that what I'm expecting to see from him is this resume of dominance at his position, where he doesn't look like he's going to be stymied or nullified by anybody, and that he has something to prove to people. This is a great opportunity for him to continue to do that. He's looked very good so far. I'm not taking anything away from that. I
think it's, but again, he looked very good against a Portland team that doesn't really play any defense. So Utah does.
Right.
So I can see your point there. If he goes out there and he still dominates a Utah team that plays defense, and guys like George Hill and Ingles can be a problem for them, with their physicality and length. Then you definitely want to see that. I think the bigger issue for me is, as you alluded to a little bit earlier, Klay Thompson. He shot 39% in that series against Portland, and again, they don't play any defense. So can Klay now kind of get his groove back potentially for a Western Conference Finals run and ultimately an NBA Finals run as well? So for me, you're looking at Steph, I'm looking at Klay to see if they can all kind of get it clicking, because when it does come down to the finals, and we'll get to that when we need to, I think they will need everybody clicking on all cylinders.
Definitely. All right, man. Awesome show. Listen, to everybody who's been tuning in, watching the NBA playoffs. We certainly appreciate you guys, staying on board with us. My man Shaw has been, highlighting it very eloquently through the Twitter. Everybody has been kind of pointing their fingers at some of the awesome stuff that's been happening through the course of the playoffs. So, once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms, available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, also available on iHeartRadio. So we encourage you guys to download any of these platforms. Available on Google Music, available on the Roku channel. the Baseline NBA podcast. This is where it's at. We get into it. We dig into it. We talk about it. We about it. That's how we roll. Once again, man, it's on and popping. It's semifinal round. So we hope you enjoyed the predictions. We hope you enjoyed the insight and the info. Definitely keep us locked. Be sure to check out our next episode where we get into the hardcore discussions with the teams that got dropped off in the first round, and also the big news about Larry Bird stepping down as president of basketball operations for the Indiana Pacers. Once again, for the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. We'll catch up with you next time.